Theodore. He's a tugboat and a friendly tugboat too. A friendly tugboat too. Oh, Theodore likes to do the things that friendly tugboats do. Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world is so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done. Oh, Theodore and Emily, Bodak, Hank and George, and the harbor master too.
It all began at the morning work meeting. The dispatcher was telling the tugs their jobs for the day.
George and Bodak,
The dispatcher began.
today I have another important job for you. There is an oil supertanker to be brought in. Proceed immediately.
Then the dispatcher turned to Theodore and Hank.
Today, you'll be replacing broken marker buoys. That is all.
Hank set off cheerfully, but Theodore began to feel a little bothered. See, he wanted the kind of job that George and Bodak had. I wish I could have a more important job, Theodore said to himself.
Okay, first off, that's Season 1 stock footage. Now, I'm all for reusing footage, but at least let it be consistent with the current season you're in. It's just a tad distracting. And also, does anybody else have any kind of similar Thomas vibe coming from Theodore? You know, like Thomas wanting to see the world, and now Theodore wanting a more important job?
Coincidence? I think not!
But anyway, Theodore and Hank are busily replacing broken marker buoys, and because they work together a lot, they have their own special whistle for each other. Not exactly your typical whistle, but it's just to say that they're happy. At the end of the day, Theodore and Hank return home and talk about their day's work. But Theodore is still feeling pretty bothered that he doesn't have an important job like Bodak or George. Until the following day when George floats up and says a very surprising thing.
Theodore, do you want to dock beside me?
Well, Theodore was very surprised, because he had always thought George's side was the more important side of the dock. You see, George is an ocean tug, and he always docks with the other ocean tugs, Emily and Bodak. And as a harbor tug, Theodore always docked with the other harbor tug, Hank.
Emily is away on an ocean job,
Explained George.
so the place beside me is empty.
But, said Theodore, I'm not an ocean tugboat. Not yet,
Oh, that's okay.
said George.
You have been the tug in charge here in the Big Harbor before.
Now that was true, thought Theodore. That was pretty important. So, Theodore happily agreed to dock beside George. Where are you going, Theodore? It was Hank. Oh, just over to the other side of the dock, replied Theodore. He was trying to sound like it really wasn't that important at all. I'm going to dock beside George tonight. But, said Hank, we always dock together. It's just for tonight, Hank, repeated Theodore. Because Emily's away, and because, George asked me to.
Wow. So Theodore ended up getting his wish, but what a way to just ditch your friend like that. And also, I'm still trying to figure out how in the hell Theodore got this tug-in-charge position just out of nowhere. Unless they're referring to the events that somehow previously happened in Theodore's whistle, it still doesn't make any sense to me. But now with Theodore on the other side of the dock, he then begins to feel a lot more special and important. And it only gets worse as he and George are sent to bring in an oil rig the following day.
As Theodore and George worked away, it was almost magical to Theodore how just changing his place at the dock had seemed to change him. He was already feeling like a more important tugboat. Theodore was so excited that he made his special whistle signal. Just to say, hello, I'm happy. But George hadn't heard Theodore's special whistle before, and he thought it might be a special kind of emergency whistle. So he tried to stop the oil rig right away. Why are you slowing down, George? Called Theodore.
I thought there was an emergency because you blew your whistle like that, replied George.
Oh, that! It's a special signal, said Theodore quickly. Hank always answers back. It's just for fun.
Well, said George crossly, this is an important job. It's not supposed to be fun. From now on, use only the regular whistle signals.
Theodore felt bad about giving George the wrong signal. But then he thought, I guess more important tugboats don't have special whistle signals because, well, they're happy anyway.
You know, I really don't blame George for thinking Theodore's whistle was an emergency whistle. But then again, I really don't think such a thing would sound as cheerful as that. Just saying. So after the two tugs finish moving the oil rig, Theodore heads back to his new place at the dock while trying to sneak past Hank. But unfortunately, Hank notices.
Theodore, you going to dock with George again? Asked Hank quietly. Oh, replied Theodore, as if he was deciding right then and there. Maybe just tonight. Emily still isn't back. Oh, that's okay, replied Hank. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, Theodore, are you still my friend? Sure I am, Hank, answered Theodore, trying to sound convincing. It's just that, well, things are different now. Hank stared at Theodore, and Theodore stared back at Hank. Things did seem to be different now, and they both knew it.
If I was in Hank's position, I'd probably feel the exact same way. I get wanting to feel more important, but how Theodore is going about it is a little dickish, honestly. Whether he says he's still Hank's friend or not, poor Hank feels as if he has lost a friend. Tell me we wouldn't even feel the exact same way. So later that night, Theodore tries to talk to George about the day's work, but the bigger tug keeps cutting him off. Now, once again, I'm going to let these next few scenes play out, and we're just going to see if being a more important tugboat is as good as Theodore imagined. Let's have a look.
This isn't like talking with Hank, thought Theodore. In fact, Theodore couldn't really talk to George at all. All he could do was listen and cough in George's smoke. No whistle signals when I'm happy, and now I can't even talk about the things that happened today. Being a more important tugboat wasn't turning out to be as good as he had imagined. Theodore drifted quietly over to his new place at the dock. Good night, Hank, called Theodore softly, even though he knew his friend couldn't hear him. Good night, Theodore, Hank said to himself, even though he knew Theodore couldn't hear him. The next morning, Theodore was just waking up when he saw a sight that made his heart leap. It was Emily! Emily's back, Theodore said to George. Oh, I guess that means I can't dock here beside you anymore. Theodore tried to look disappointed, but inside he was feeling very relieved.
Oh, said George, there's lots of room here. Ha, you can dock beside me forever.
Well, Theodore just stared at George and didn't say a word. He couldn't say a word. He had a big lump in his throat. Forever? That was a long, long time. A little later, Theodore helped George take a ship out of the harbor. Theodore couldn't stop thinking about living on the other side of the dock forever. He wanted to be a more important boat, and he thought that's where more important tugboats do have their regular place, but somehow, feeling more important just didn't make him feel happy. In fact, right now, Theodore felt sad. Just then, he heard a whistle, a special whistle signal that said, "Hello, I'm happy." It was Hank, replacing another broken marker buoy. Now, Theodore didn't want to whistle back. He was afraid George would get upset again. But somehow, just hearing Hank's whistle made Theodore feel a little better.
Yeah, by the looks of it, It seems as though Theodore is finally realizing that being more important isn't as much fun as he once thought. So when all the tugs head back to the dock later that night, Hank sees Theodore heading to the other side, and it seems he may be docking alone once again. Until...
It was a whistle. A special whistle signal. Hank whistled back and slowly looked around. Theodore, what are you doing here? Oh, replied Theodore. Oh, I thought I'd come back to my old place at the dock right here. But it's just regular harbor tugs on this side, said Hank sadly. Not more important ones like George. Well, I was just telling George, replied Theodore, that all the tugboats are important to me. Me too, said Hank with a smile on his voice. Theodore slid into his old place at the dock beside Hank. It felt just right. Good night, Theodore, said Hank. It was a nice day. Good night, Hank, said Theodore. It was a very nice day. And I think tomorrow will be even better.
And that concludes Theodore Changes Sides. I think this episode is pretty good for what it is. At least it teaches a valuable lesson that no one is more important than the rest. And even though it's okay to feel important at times, it doesn't give you the right to just ditch your friends. For characters, as I said, I get a very big Thomas vibe from Theodore wanting a more important job. And even though I understand how he felt, it still wasn't fair of him to make Hank feel the way he did. As I said, we would probably feel the exact same way. And that's why I sympathize with Hank a lot more in this episode. And in a way, it was also a little bit of George that made Theodore kind of see the light. Between the whistle signals, even the offer to stay on the opposite side of the dock, as I said, Theodore then realized it really wasn't as much fun. At least by the ending, he actually did come to his senses and realize that all of the tugs are important. For music, this is another one of those episodes where it really helps to set the emotion of certain scenes, particularly when Theodore is told he could live on the other side of the dock forever. It's definitely really heartbreaking seeing Theodore and Hank's reactions. It may not be the best, but I think this episode is definitely worth checking out. Up next is Night Shift.